A divorced woman has no place at the front of this house, he told the whole congregation. He didn't know I was the auditor who'd traced every dollar he stole, and the anniversary banquet would prove it. The microphone popped once, a hard crackle through the old speakers, and then Elder Boyd's voice filled the sanctuary of First Cornerstone like water filling a lung. "A divorced woman," he said, and let it hang, and the fluorescent light over the choir loft buzzed the way it always did in August, "has no place at the front of this house." 200 faces turned toward me at once. I was standing at the offering table where I had stood every third Sunday for 11 years, the felt cloth still warm from the sun through the east windows, and I felt every eye land on my skin like a slap I couldn't slap back. He smiled while he said it. That was the part I would carry, not the words, the smile, small and satisfied, the way a man smiles when he thinks he has won something he never had to fight for. My father's hymnal was in my left hand, the worn brown leather soft as an old glove, and I gripped it so hard the spine creaked, and I did not cry, and I did not sit, and I did not run. I set the hymnal down on the felt, quietly, and I walked out the side door into the parking lot heat. But here is the thing Elder Boyd did not know as he watched me go. He thought he was watching a shamed woman leave. He was watching a certified forensic accountant walk out with the first thread of a rope she would spend 9 months braiding. He had spent 30 years standing at that front, and he had never once wondered what I did for a living. That was going to cost him everything. Let me take you back, because a wound only makes sense if you know the whole body it belongs to. My name is Winnie Ibarra, and I grew up 4 blocks from that church on the west side of Montgomery, Alabama, in a shotgun house on Mobile Road with a porch light that flickered whenever the window unit kicked on. My father, Elias Ibarra, drove a city sanitation truck for 26 years and never missed a Sunday at First Cornerstone in all of them. He had come from Nigeria in 1971 with 1 suitcase and a King James Bible, and by the time I was born in 1979, he had made himself into the kind of man other men quieted down for. He sang bass in the choir. He kept the church's little collection ledger for a season in the 80s, in pencil, because he did not trust ink to be honest. You could always erase a mistake in pencil, he said, but you could never hide that you had. That was my father's whole theology in 1 sentence. You could never hide that you had. We were not poor exactly, but money was a thing you counted. I watched my mother stretch a $43 grocery run across 9 days. I watched my father write down every dollar that passed through his hands, and I learned, without knowing I was learning it, that numbers are a kind of testimony. They tell you where a person's heart actually went, no matter what their mouth said on Sunday. I was good at them, not clever good, patient good. In the 10th grade at Robert E. Lee High, I found $40 missing from the yearbook fund and traced it over 3 afternoons to a booster treasurer who'd been rounding receipts down and pocketing the difference, nickels at a time. Nobody thanked me. The teacher told me to mind my own business, but my father took me to Martin's for fried chicken and cornbread that Friday and said, "You have your grandfather's eyes. He counted goats. You'll count bigger things." I was 15. I did not know how right he was. I put myself through Alabama State on a mix of grants and a job at the campus print shop, graduated with an accounting degree in 2001, and passed all 4 parts of the CPA exam by 2003. Then I did the thing almost nobody does. I kept going. In 2009, I earned my CFE, Certified Fraud Examiner. By 2015, I was a senior forensic accountant at a regional firm in Birmingham, the person they flew in when a nonprofit's books didn't breathe right, when a deacon board suddenly couldn't explain a $60,000 hole, when a bank needed to know exactly which hand had been in the drawer and for how long. I spent my working life doing one quiet thing. I found the money that men in respectable collars swore was never missing. I never bragged about it at church. That was on purpose. My father raised me to understand that the front of the room was for God and the back of the room was for watching, and I was a back-of-the-room person. Most people at First Cornerstone thought I did something with taxes. Elder Boyd, if he thought about me at all, thought I was Sister Winnie, who ran the third Sunday offering table and had a nice speaking voice and a bad marriage. I met my ex-husband Dorsey in 2004, and I married him in 2006 in that same sanctuary, and Elder Boyd himself read the vows because our pastor at the time, old Pastor Ruffin, was too sick with his kidneys to stand that long. Boyd was gracious that day. I want to be fair, because my father taught me that fairness is the sharpest blade you own. In the early years, Elder Boyd was a genuinely useful man. He ran the building committee. He organized the food pantry that fed maybe 70 families a month out of the fellowship hall. When my mother died in 2011, he sat with my father in the ICU at Baptist South for 2 nights and did not leave. And my father never forgot it. Neither did I. That is what makes the rest of it so cold. He had it in him to be good. He just found something he liked better. The first wrong note I filed away was small, the way they always are. It was the spring of 2018. First Cornerstone was gearing up for a big capital campaign, a new fellowship hall and a fixed roof, target $850,000, to be finished in time for the church's centennial in 2026. Elder Boyd chaired the building fund. I sat in the back at the members' meeting in April and watched him present a 1-page summary, and something in my chest went very still. He reported the fund balance as a single round number, $312,000, with no line items, no bank statement, no breakdown of pledges received versus cash in hand. When Sister Odessa Pruitt, 79 years old and sharp as a tack, asked to see the actual bank statement, Boyd smiled that smile and said the finance committee had reviewed everything and there was no need to trouble the congregation with paperwork. I have sat across the table from 40 men who used that exact tone. It is the tone of a man building a wall out of your own trust in him. I did not say anything. I wrote the number 312,000 on the inside back cover of my father's hymnal in pencil next to the date because it was the only paper I had in my purse and because it felt right to write it there. The second wrong note came in September 2019. The new pastor by then was a younger man named Reverend Tolliver, well-meaning and overwhelmed, and Elder Boyd had made himself indispensable to him the way a barnacle makes itself indispensable to a hull. I overheard Boyd in the church office telling Tolliver that the building fund had paid $18,500 to a consulting firm for campaign strategy. I knew campaign consultants. I knew what they cost a church our size. Nothing close to that, and never in cash. I asked Boyd casually in the hallway who the firm was. He looked at me for 1 full second longer than the question deserved, and then he said, "Sister Winnie, you don't need to worry your head about the Lord's business," and walked off. I went home and looked up the business name he'd finally muttered. It didn't exist. No LLC registration in Alabama, no Secretary of State filing, nothing. A ghost with an $18,500 invoice. I filed it away. The drawer in my head where I kept things about Elder Boyd was getting full. The third note was the marriage. My marriage to Dorsey had been dying quietly for years. No villain, just 2 people who ran out of the same direction. We separated in 2021 and divorced in 2022, and it was the loneliest, most ordinary grief there is. What I needed from my church was to be left alone to heal in the back pew where I belonged. What I got, starting the very month the divorce was final, was Elder Boyd deciding I was a lesson he could teach. It started as concern, which is how cruelty dresses for church. He told the women's ministry I should step back from visible roles until my household was in order. He suggested to Reverend Tolliver that a divorced woman handling the offering sent the wrong message. He said it gently, always in that voice that made you feel small for being hurt by it. And I watched, with the cold, flat attention I bring to a set of cooked books, as the story of my divorce got repeated and swollen and turned into something with my fault in the middle of it. Then, in the winter of 2023, the fourth note. And this one wasn't a note, it was a whole broken chord. Sister Odessa, the 79-year-old who'd asked for the bank statement, pulled me aside after Wednesday service into the little kitchen off the fellowship hall, where the coffee urn hissed and the ice maker dropped a load of cubes with a crash. She was shaking. She told me she'd been a volunteer counting the offering for 30 years, and that lately Boyd had reorganized the counting so that only 2 people he'd handpicked ever touched the money before it went to the bank. She told me the food pantry had quietly shrunk from 70 families to 30, even though donations were up. And she told me the thing that made my hands go still on the counter. She'd seen a bank notice in the office trash, a real one from Regions Bank, showing a building fund balance of $71,000, not $312,000, 71. Winnie, she said, I don't understand money the way you do, but I know when a man's lying to God's face. Will you look? I told her I would think about it. That was a lie of mercy. I had already started. Here is where I have to tell you the part that made everything else possible, and I'll say it as plainly as my father would have. 6 weeks earlier, in October 2023, the denomination's regional office had quietly hired my firm to conduct an independent forensic audit of 3 of its churches, whose financials had raised questions. A whistleblower letter had reached the district superintendent. The churches weren't named to me by their people, only by their file numbers, and I hadn't yet opened the boxes. When I finally sat down at my desk in Birmingham in December and pulled the first folder, the letterhead read, First Cornerstone Missionary Baptist, Montgomery, Alabama. My church. My father's church. The church whose front Elder Boyd had banished me from. I am the forensic auditor the denomination brought in. I was going to trace every dollar Elder Boyd had touched, with a subpoena's worth of authority behind me, and he had no idea I could read a balance sheet at all. I want to tell you I felt triumphant. I didn't. I sat in my office at 6:40 on a Tuesday evening with the space heater ticking and the parking lot empty, and I put my head down on my father's hymnal. I keep it on my desk, always, next to the stapler, and I wept for maybe 4 minutes, for the food pantry families, for Sister Odessa's shaking hands, for my father, who kept his ledger in pencil so no one could hide what they'd done, sitting in the same pews as a man who'd built his whole life out of hiding. Then I lifted my head and I wiped my face and I did the thing I was born to do. I opened the box. The boiling point had already come and gone, technically. The Sunday he shamed me from the front, August 2023, the smile, the light, the felt cloth still warm. But I need you to understand that when he did that, when he stood 200 people up to look at me and called me a woman with no place, I did not yet know I would be his auditor. I found that out 4 months later. So when I say the shame and the assignment collided in me, I mean it literally. The man who had humiliated me in front of my father's whole congregation was, by the luck or the justice of it, the exact man the numbers had handed me. The cold decision wasn't a decision at all. It was a click, quiet as a lock. I called my co-auditor, Corliss, a woman I'd worked beside for 6 years, precise as a scalpel and twice as kind. And I told her one thing, Corliss, I have a conflict of interest on the Montgomery file. I'm a member of that church. The chairman of the building fund publicly humiliated me from the pulpit in August. There was a pause. Then Corliss said, So you want off it? No, I said, I want you on it with me, name to name, every work paper co-signed, so that when it's finished, Not one soul on this earth can say I did it out of spite. I want it so clean it squeaks. You check my math, I'll check yours. And Corliss, we disclose the conflict to the superintendent in writing today before we touch another page. That is the difference between revenge and justice, and my father drew that line in me before I could spell either word. Revenge wants to be the one holding the knife. Justice wants the knife to be true even in another hand. I disclosed everything. The superintendent, a careful man named Dr. Whitfield, approved us continuing with Corliss as lead of record and me as forensic support, precisely because a documented, disclosed conflict handled in the open is bulletproof, and a hidden one is a grenade. We wrote that memo on December 12, 2023. I keep a copy. Then we went to work. And I will not pretend it was thrilling, because real justice is the least thrilling thing in the world. It is paper. We pulled 7 years of Regions Bank statements for the building fund, the general fund, and the food pantry account, going back to 2017. 84 months of statements, line by line. We requested them through the denomination's authority, so Boyd never saw the request. It went to the bank, not to him. We built a spreadsheet with 1,140 transactions on it. We matched every deposit against the counting team tally sheets Sister Odessa had quietly saved in a Piggly Wiggly bag under her sink for 3 years. God bless the record keepers of this world, the little old women who never throw anything away. And a pattern rose up off that spreadsheet like heat off asphalt. Between January 2018 and November 2023, the counting sheets showed $487,000 in cash offerings designated for the building fund. The bank showed $71,000. The gap, $416,000, had never touched an account. It had been skimmed at the count before deposit by the 2-person team Boyd had handpicked and walked out the door. Then there were the ghosts, the $18,500 consulting firm that didn't exist. We found 6 more like it. Payments to shell vendors, all authorized by one signature, all routed to a personal account at a credit union in Prattville that traced through 2 hops to Elder Boyd's son-in-law. A $22,000 roofing deposit for a roof that was never touched. I stood in that parking lot in March 2024 and photographed the same 1994 shingles curling at the edges. And the smear, this was the part that turned my stomach even after 20 years of turned stomachs. $9,400 of building fund money paid to a man in Atlanta who ran a reputation and communications service. His invoices, which we obtained by subpoena, itemized Social Media Narrative Management, re W. Ibarra, and Congregational Messaging Support. Elder Boyd had spent the church's roof money to pay a stranger to make my divorce look like a scandal, so that when he pushed me out of the light, the congregation would nod along. He had stolen $416,000 in cash and at least another $71,000 in fake vendors, and he'd used a slice of it to buy the lie he told about me. $487,000. And the man had the nerve to stand at the front of my father's church and tell 200 people I had no place there. I did not confront him. Not once in 9 months. I passed him in the fellowship hall and said, "Good morning, Elder Boyd," and let him think I was beaten. I sat in the back pew with my father's hymnal in my lap and sang the alto line and watched him chair his meetings. Corliss said to me once over the phone, "How are you not screaming?" And I told her the truth. My father used to say, "The loudest thing in the room is the thing that doesn't know it's already lost." I don't need to be loud. I've got the numbers. The numbers don't need volume. We finished the report in April 2024, 230 pages. Every dollar sourced, every claim tied to a bank record or a signed sheet, co-signed by Corliss and by me, disclosed conflict and all. We delivered it to Dr. Whitfield and the denominational board on May 2nd. And then Dr. Whitfield, who understood theater in the way that careful men sometimes secretly do, asked me one question. "Sister Ibarra, when would you like this presented to the congregation?" I thought about August, and the smile, and the light through the east windows. I thought about my father, who had wanted more than anything to live to see the church's 100th year and had died in 2019, 7 years short. And I said, "The centennial's coming. First weekend of June. There's a banquet. The whole church and the district and the mayor's office invited. Present it then." And Dr. Whitfield, "I don't want to be the one who says it. Ask Pastor Amos to read it." Amos. I have to tell you about Amos, because the warmth of this whole cold story lives in him. Amos Fairley was my father's oldest friend on this earth. They'd met in a citizenship class in 1972, two immigrants learning the same country, and they'd stayed brothers for 47 years until my father's heart quit. Amos became a pastor in Selma, retired now at 81, with a voice like a cello left out in good weather. When my father was dying at Baptist South in 2019, it was Amos who held his hand, and it was Amos who preached him home. Amos had watched Elder Boyd shame me in August 2023. He'd been visiting that Sunday, and afterward he'd found me in the parking lot and said only, "Your daddy would have stood up. Since he can't, you tell me when, and I will." I hadn't been ready to tell him what I knew. Now I was. I called Amos on May 6th, and I told him everything, all 230 pages of it, and there was a long silence on the line. And then that old cello voice said, "Winnie, give me the report." I'll carry it in for Elias. The Centennial Banquet was Saturday, June 7th, 2024, in the Fellowship Hall of First Cornerstone, the same hall the missing $416,000 was supposed to have rebuilt, still with its 1994 roof and its water-stained ceiling tile in the corner. They'd strung white lights and set out the good tablecloths and the folding chairs, and there were maybe 240 people there, plus the district superintendent's table and a woman from the mayor's office and a reporter from the Montgomery Advertiser doing a nice centennial feature. Elder Boyd sat at the head table in a cream-colored suit, presiding, because, of course, he presided. He'd had a plaque made for himself. 30 years of faithful stewardship, it said. I sat near the back, with Sister Odessa on my right and my father's hymnal on my lap, and I was calm the way the surface of a well is calm. There were speeches, there was a chicken dinner, and then Dr. Whitfield stood and said the denomination had a special centennial presentation, and he asked Pastor Amos Fairley of Selma, a son of this church's oldest friendship, to come and share it. Amos rose slowly, 81 years old, gray suit, and in his hands my 230-page report in a plain black binder. He walked to the podium at the front, the same fluorescent light, the same buzz, and he set the binder down, and he opened it, and he put on his reading glasses, and the room got the particular quiet of people who can feel weather coming. "This church is 100 years old this year," Amos began. "My brother Elias Ibarra loved it for 48 of those years. He kept its ledger in pencil because he said you can erase a mistake, but you can never hide that you made one. I stand here tonight in his place to read what the denomination's independent forensic auditors have found. I did not write a word of it. I only get to be the man who reads it out loud." I watched Elder Boyd's face. This is the part I had waited 9 months for, and it did not disappoint, and I am not ashamed to say so. When Amos said the words, independent forensic auditors, Boyd's smile stayed on, but it stopped meaning anything, the way a light stays on in an empty house. When Amos read the first finding, The building fund reported to this congregation in 2018 as holding $312,000, in fact, held $71,000 and holds $71,000 today. The cream suit went very still. And when Amos read, in his slow, patient cello voice, of $487,000 in cash designated by this congregation for its centennial building, $416,000 never reached the bank, Elder Boyd's face drained from the collar up, gray as the underside of a fish, and his hand found the edge of the head table and gripped it. The room made a sound I will never forget. Not a gasp, a low, moving murmur, 240 people turning to each other and then turning, all of them, toward the head table. Sister Odessa took my hand under the tablecloth and squeezed it so hard it hurt. Amos read the ghost vendors. He read the credit union in Prattville and the son-in-law's account, and there was a small, choked noise from the son-in-law's table. He read the $22,000 roof that was never touched, and he lifted his old eyes to the water-stained tile in the corner and let everyone follow his gaze, and nobody breathed. And then Amos turned a page, and his voice changed. It got softer, and somehow that was worse for Boyd than if he'd shouted. "There is one more finding," Amos said. "Between 2022 and 2023, this fund paid $9,400 to a man in Atlanta to, I am reading the invoice, manage the congregational narrative regarding W. Ibarra, to make a story about a daughter of this church, using the money you all gave to build a hall." He took off his glasses. "Winnie Ibarra did not have a place at the front of this house," Elder Boyd said last August. "Brothers and sisters, Winnie Ibarra is the forensic accountant the denomination hired. She traced every dollar. She disclosed that she was a member here, in writing, on December the 12th, and asked that her partner co-sign every page so that no one could ever call it revenge. It is not revenge. It is a ledger, in pencil, and it cannot be erased." Elder Boyd stood up. I think he meant to speak, to do the thing he always did, the gentle voice, the wall of trust. He got as far as, "Now, this is a misunderstanding, and I would ask," and his own voice betrayed him, cracked in the middle, and I watched 30 years of that smile fall off his face and land on the good tablecloth. Two deacons were already moving toward the head table. Dr. Whitfield was on his feet, and Elder Boyd, cornered in the light he'd loved so much, did the truest thing he'd done in years. He begged. "Please," he said, to no one, to everyone, "please, I can explain I meant to put it back. I always meant to." The mayor's aide was writing. The reporter was writing, and the man who had told me I had no place stood alone at the front, with everyone's eyes on him at last, and no one, not one soul in that hall, stood up to defend him. He was removed from the eldership that night by a vote of the deacon board, suspended pending the criminal referral Dr. Whitfield had already prepared. By August 2024, the district attorney's office in Montgomery had charged him with theft of property in the first degree and financial exploitation. The son-in-law took a plea. The reputation man in Atlanta returned $9,400 rather than be named in the papers. And on a Sunday that fall, Reverend Tolliver stood at the front of First Cornerstone and read a formal apology to me, by name, and asked me to resume my place at the offering table if I was willing. I want to tell you the sweetest part, though, because the story isn't the banquet. The story is what the banquet was for. 3 weeks after the centennial, on a Sunday evening in late June, Amos drove up from Selma, and we had supper on my father's old porch on Mobile Road. Me, Amos, Corliss, and Sister Odessa, who had brought a caramel cake balanced on her lap the whole way. The porch light flickered when the window unit kicked on, the same flicker it's had for 40 years, and none of us fixed it, because some things you keep. We ate cake off paper plates. Corliss and Odessa argued happily about whether the recipe needed a full cup of buttermilk. Amos told the story about the citizenship class in 1972, the one where he met my father, both of them getting the same civics question wrong and laughing so hard the teacher separated them. And at the end of the evening, Amos reached into his jacket and brought out something and set it in my hands, and it was my father's hymnal, the worn brown leather, soft as a glove, his notes penciled small in the margins. I'd left it on the head table at the banquet, of all places, in the noise of it all, and Amos had quietly picked it up and kept it safe for 3 weeks without a word. On the inside back cover, in my own hand, was the number 312,000, next to a date in 2018. And beside it now, in pencil, in a careful old man script I knew as well as my own name, Amos had added one line: traced, cleared, Elias's girl, June 7th, 2024. I turned the pages until I found the hymn my father had marked more than any other, the corner soft from his thumb, the margin beside it darkened with 50 years of his handwriting, 3 little penciled words next to the first verse: sing it slow. It was, great is thy faithfulness. I didn't say anything. I just opened it flat on my knee under the flickering porch light, and I started the first line low in my father's key, and Amos came in under me on the bass, and Corliss found the harmony, and Sister Odessa, 79 years old, with her caramel cake gone to crumbs, closed her eyes and sang it slow, the way the margin said, the way my father wanted, until the whole porch was full of it, and the man who'd told me I had no place was not anywhere in that sound at all.